Good evening, good day, good morning, I think it is, still in Melbourne, Canberra. Welcome to another special episode of Real Tennis Fans. We have a special guest with us this evening, and tonight our special episode is entitled All Doped Up with Richard Ings. And And unfortunately, we don't have any sponsors today, but Dr. Zhivago and our girl Meldonium here to say hello, so just keep in contact if you want to. But before I go any further, let me introduce my co-host and then our special guest. As always, we have Andrine from Solely Tennis Travel, all the way she's back home.
Hello.
And our Kato Killing of podcast, our foreign correspondent, and who has done us. I mean, Janina should get a special prize. She's working so hard for this podcast. Who advocated for new guests here? She got she pulled out all the stuff for this guest. Janina.
Hello.
How are you this evening? You get a special toot for that, just to let you know.
Aw, shucks, I feel special.
And myself for real, but you don't even need to know anything about me because today we have a special guest, as I said before, and it's Richard Ing, and he's coming to you live and direct from Canberra. Am I correct? Or Sydney, Australia?
I'm in Canberra, and you can tell it's me when I'm talking because I'm the one with a sophisticated Australian accent on the
Thank you. You tell those English people that Australian accents are sophisticated. Do not let Downton Abbey run the show, okay? So, fans, well, we know this is the fourth month of tennis, and we don't even know what else tennis can bring to us. But one of the biggest story this year in all of tennis has been doping, anti-doping, and we talked a lot about Meldonium in particular, Maria Sharapova. We just wanted to sort of like sidetrack from that issue and talk about anti-doping, doping on a whole, and we figured nothing better than to have an expert on the field, so we decided to get Richard Ings on. I shouldn't say Janina decided Richard Ings should get on the podcast, and she did all of that, and so he is here for us today. So Richard, could you tell our fans who you are besides your name and what you're all about, why we got you on our podcast?
Yeah, look, I'll give you the 30-year rundown in 30 seconds. I've been involved in tennis extensively for more than 30 years. Firstly, through the mid-80s and mid-90s, I was a professional tennis umpire, the third professional tennis umpire hired by the governing body of men's pro tennis. Over 10 years, I umpired over 2,000 professional tennis matches, over 150 ATP and Grand Slam tournament finals. So there was a great era of tennis with McEnroe and Lendl and Becker and Connors and Agassi and Sampras, and just an amazing era of tennis. After that, I took on a job as Executive Vice President of Rules and Competition for the ATP, working in their Ponte Vedra office, and there between 2000 and 2005 I looked after all of the anti-doping for tennis. I looked after all the anti-corruption for tennis, all the supervisors and major offence investigations and players' fines and misconduct, and managing the rule book for the ATP in general. And then in 2005, I took on a job as the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority, which is the Australian government authority set up to manage Australia's anti-doping policy and anti-doping efforts on behalf of the Australian government.
Oh, wow. So
It's quite a background you've got there.
let me just say,
it's quite eclectic.
I know, but I know you were happy when you left that umpire chair because that money from ATP was totally a larger check. It was almost like you won a Grand Slam. So congratulations to that, because I think we never really know what happens to umpires. We see them and then they disappear, and then we're like, oh, someone new is here. Okay, what happened? So now we know that they do get the little pittance that you usually get in the beginning usually pay off to a larger paycheck. That's really good. Excited to know. I'm happy to know that Ava Azdaraki and others are not starving. Their future looks brighter. So
Yeah, there is life after spending years sitting up in an umpire's chair being yelled at.
Yes, that's true, and we'll hope you can tell us some really salacious stories later on. But well, I guess one of the first questions, I guess we can, I'm gonna have Janine ask the first question. She brought you here. She's your guest, basically.
Oh, how nice
You
of
are
you.
her guest, I should
Well,
say.
let's start with how the whole process works. What really is the relationship between WADA and the anti-doping agencies throughout the world? How's the hierarchy work?
Well, to keep it very simple, the World Anti-Doping Agency, it's the overarching international group of stakeholders of sport and governments who set the rules. So there's something called the World Anti-Doping Agency Code, and it's a common set of rules that all sports and all governments have to implement in regard to their local anti-doping policy. So what you've got all these countries around the world, whether it's Russia or Kenya or Australia or the US, who are implementing anti-doping rules. You've got all these sports around the world that have signed up for the WADA code, tennis and basketball and football. They're implementing the WADA rules. They do all the testing, the sports and the governments. They manage any positives that come through. And what WADA does in the background is looks at how these stakeholders, sports and governments, implement anti-doping. And if they think those sports and governments have got it wrong, WADA has the power to come in and appeal and seek to overturn the decision.
Okay. It seems like there is a battle between WADA in certain countries right now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, look, one of the biggest challenges for WADA is anti-doping has historically been about athletes complying with anti-doping rules. We hear it all the time. You've got to be careful about what you take, and if you take something bad and test positive, there's a consequence and strict liability and all that sort of thing. That's well understood by athletes, and athletes who get it wrong, normally face very serious consequences. But there's a flip side to that responsibility, and that's where sports and governments, they also have to comply with anti-doping rules. They need to be professional and implement them correctly and fairly. And where WADA is struggling at the moment is, rather than athletes getting the rules wrong, which is pretty easy to ban an athlete for a couple of years, we're getting governments and we're getting sports getting the rules wrong. So we're seeing it in Russia, we're seeing it in track and field, we're seeing it in Kenya, we're seeing it in Ethiopia, we're seeing it in the UK even at the moment. And that's a challenge for WADA, because you can throw an athlete out of a competition for 4 years, but it gets quite complicated to throw a whole sport out or to throw a whole country out.
Right.
What exactly happened in Russia? What's happening there? What's the challenge there?
Well, what we're seeing in Russia is state-sponsored doping. What was uncovered there was a situation where the Russian laboratory was testing Russian athletes, but if they tested positive, those samples were being basically kept aside so that the positive athlete wasn't being put through the system. It wasn't being processed as a positive test. So effectively it was being covered up at the highest levels by the Russian Athletics Federation and also by the Russian laboratory. And that's awful, but it actually gets worse because the then senior leadership of international track and field were actually involved in extorting money from Russian athletes to bury their positive tests. They were the executives in the sport were soliciting bribes to not prosecute athletes in particular countries. So it was a huge fraud and a great rort of the international anti-doping system.
So what recourse? What recourse does WADA have when they find something like that out? Who does the prosecuting in a situation like that in terms of an entire country?
Yeah, this is where it gets really, really complicated because the rules are really very clear when it comes to an individual athlete.
Yeah.
And the rules are pretty clear when it comes to a sporting team. But the rules get very murky when it comes to an international federation or a national federation or a country. In theory, the way it should work is if a country is non-compliant with the WADA code, or a national federation or an international federation is non-compliant with the WADA code, then they're banned from international competition. They're banned from the Olympic Games for a period of time. And what you're seeing now is the challenge of how do you ban countries that are really too big and too important to fail and not be present at the Olympic Games. That's the quandary for WADA at the moment.
Are we seeing a crackdown because it is an Olympic year, or is this a coincidence?
No, look, I think we're seeing a crackdown because for those of us who have been involved in anti-doping for years, and those of us who are keen observers, we have seen and we've been greatly concerned that the standard of anti-doping capability across various sports and across various countries is very uneven, and in some countries and in some sports it is tantamount to almost being corrupt. So when we hear about what's happened in track and field and we hear about what's happened in Russia, you know, we close observers are not surprised. In fact, we're heartened that finally, after years of this, something is being done. So it's a good step at the end of the day.
So what you're saying is really this hasn't been a secret to the people on the inside. It's just coming out now to the casual fan.
Yeah, look, it hasn't been a secret at all to those who've been observing it. And in fact, you know, one of the other really crazy things about this, like this situation in Russia with, you know, corrupt labs and all that sort of thing, this story was actually broken by the Daily Mail in the UK. It was broken in 2014, but it took nearly a year and a half before the authorities actually started doing something about it. Initially, there were excuses being made, and you know, the media is attacking the sport and all the usual shooting of the messenger. But these are real ongoing issues, and it means that doping athletes are winning medals that they shouldn't be winning.
This is my. I was going to ask you. You mentioned that in Russia, particularly, that these athletes are not being. They were being tested in Russia, but they were not being reported as being positive, which is part of the WADA code. That if an athlete tests positive, you are to report it to all of the governing bodies, WADA and the sporting agency, federation. But was it the case that these athletes, when they go into international competition, would fail doping tests again, and then the track and field officials would then cover up those tests again?
Yeah, look, there were two things that were happening in regard to these Russian athletes. Firstly, in Russia, the Russian anti-doping system there actually ran a second lab. They called it a shadow lab, and it was a government lab that the samples would be collected from the local Russian players and then be analysed by this secret laboratory. And if they came back positive, it wasn't reported to anybody, and the athlete was told there's an issue and given an opportunity to get clean before the main WADA lab, you know, came and did sample collection from them. So that's what was happening there. And then if these athletes, Russian athletes, you know, had unusual test results at international competitions, then there was fraud being committed by the IAAF, by its international anti-doping department to effectively solicit a bribe from these Russian athletes to make their positive test or near positive test go away. It makes me laugh because it's just such rampant fraud. It's quite incredible.
So and no one has yet gone to jail, right? No one is going to jail.
So what happened with Meldonium? How did that get through? How did it cause everything to sort of crash a little bit? Because if this has been going on since 2014, how did Meldonium escape, and why do we know about it now?
Well, you know, Meldonium's a very, very interesting topic. Where you need to start with Meldonium is that it's an over-the-counter medication. Mm-hmm. It's widely available in Eastern Europe. You know, it's $4 or $5 a box to buy it from the pharmacy over the counter. It's been perfectly approved for use by athletes for more than a decade. Athletes, if they've been allowed to take it, WADA's allowed athletes to take it for more than a decade through the 31st of December last year. Now, last year, WADA did some monitoring of Meldonium use, and they found that there were a lot of athletes using Meldonium. And WADA made a decision to put it on the ban list. But it does appear that a great many of the athletes using Meldonium perfectly legitimately until the 31st of December didn't get the message or weren't adequately told that it was now banned. And I think at last count there's around 150 athletes tested positive for Meldonium, and that's really unusual to get so many so close to a new rule change testing positive.
So what do you think that impact will be? Because it is so many, I think because the number is so great, there's sort of this perception that something went wrong, and so the athlete can't be blamed fully. What's your sense about that?
Yeah, look, it's a really difficult one because we don't kind of know all the details, but I think it would be fair to say that the first few Meldonium cases that go through are going to be subject to a lot of legal argument. You know, how well do sports do in communicating to all the players and all the athletes that it really is banned? What's the reasons why it's banned at all? These cases will be a very, very interesting test case for the robustness of WADA's procedure to put something on the banned list and the effectiveness of international sports obligations to let everyone know that a new substance widely used is now not allowed to be used.
I just want to clarify. You mentioned that you said that Meldonium was approved by WADA. Was it that it was approved or WADA didn't make any sort of distinction, and it was unknown to WADA, therefore athletes can use it? Was there a list that said that Meldonium, you can use Meldonium?
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, they're kind of one and the same thing, and let me explain. You know, there's probably, I don't know, there's hundreds of thousands of products, you know, medicines and drugs and nutritional supplements and all that sort of thing that athletes could possibly use. And the WADA ban list maybe has a couple of hundred which are banned. So WADA doesn't produce a list of what's allowed. WADA produces a list of what is not allowed.
Okay.
And Meldonium was not on the ban list, like caffeine's not on the ban list. So athletes and players have been perfectly allowed to use it for more than a decade since it was produced until the 31st of December last year.
Okay.
So are you in the camp that believes if it's not on the list and an athlete is using it, even if it's giving them some kind of edge, that it's okay? Or is that a way of moral cheating?
Yeah, look, I mean, all you can ask an athlete to do is to follow the rules. And the rules will tell you what you're allowed to take from an anti-doping perspective, and the rules will very clearly tell you what you're not allowed to take. When substances get into areas which are, you know, they're not banned by WADA, sports have every opportunity, if they want to put in place extra rules. So I'll give you an example. WADA bans, you know, like a drug like methamphetamine. That's banned for use by athletes in and around competition. But would you believe that WADA doesn't ban athletes from using methamphetamine away from competition? Yeah. Which I find that incredibly bizarre, but WADA don't ban it. That WADA say it's okay. So a sport, if they wanted to, and some sports do, can go in and implement their own rules.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting. I guess I thought that WADA was the umbrella for everybody, and they followed it. I didn't realize that there could be sub-rules to what WADA delegates.
For specific sports, right? Some sports find some drugs more problematic than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, motor racing, for instance, alcohol is something you wouldn't want Formula One drivers to have, but in other sports it's probably not such a big deal. So different sports.
Tennis players do drink.
Well,
different sports can have rules.
I'm curious about this because this is one of the. I find that some of the challenges right now in terms of how anti-doping is covered in the news is that there is the sense that the athlete doesn't have the ability to participate in the process before a substance gets on the banned list. I just read an article today that was sort of hinting that WADA's the problem with WADA is that athletes don't have any say. At the end of the day, they find out that they've done something wrong and they're sort of screwed. But there isn't this sort of what happens in the investigation process before something enters the banned list? Isn't there a point in time where there can be some feedback from an athlete or groups of doctors or any of those folks?
No. And I think that's one of the problems. I've been involved in global anti-doping with a sport, with tennis, and with a government, here in Australia for a decade. And I don't really understand how substances end up on the ban list. I do know the mechanics. There are 3 criteria, and 2 of the 3 criteria need to be met, and you're told that it did meet 2 of the 3 criteria, and it's on the list. But I haven't seen scientific research as to how and why things get put on the ban list, and I think that's a gap. I think that's a big gap, because the more you can inform people, the more you can explain to people, the more you can not so much justify, but keep people in the loop as to the reasons why things are happening, the more they're prepared to understand and accept them. That's missing at the moment.
And the more likely they're able to see that something is not a plot, because I think in some ways people are seeing what's happening with Russia and saying, okay, this is a plot to overthrow Russia, because that Russians were using Meldonium, and so how did it emerge as one of the many things to enter the banned list, So that lack of clarity.
Yeah, look, one of the other really big things about Meldonium is there's a big degree of uncertainty at the moment as to how long Meldonium will stay in your body.
I know.
I've heard some people say, and I've seen reports that say 6 hours, and I've seen the manufacturer, the pharmaceutical company, say it could be several months. That's a really, really important issue. If it does stay in your body for several months, and you took it a week before the 31st of December, then you took it perfectly legally. You're perfectly able to take it, but it's still in your body, come midnight the 1st of January, and you're committing an offence then, but what do you do about it? So these sorts of things, the scientific information is so important to get out to athletes so that they can work to their best within the rules, but they've got to be explained to them.
But isn't it kind of, we can't do a lot of hand-holding, because right now we can go to the WADA website and we can look and see what's on the monitoring list for this year and know that there's a very good possibility that come 2017, these things are going to be banned. So don't you have to put some kind of responsibility on the athlete to keep up with that, or at the very least, their teams?
Look, it is strict liability, and the onus does fall onto the athletes. But that doesn't mean that the sports and the governments and WADA don't have their own obligation to take all reasonable steps to make sure athletes are informed. And I don't begrudge how difficult that process is for a sport or a government or WADA. I've done it for a sport. I know how difficult it is to have 15,000 tennis players, and you've got to get a message to 15,000 of them of a rule change to make sure they know. I know from experience that the efforts that you put in there are very important, because there are going to be many, many, many players who won't know that it's now a 25-second rule instead of a 30-second rule, or there's a new thing in the code of conduct, or there's a new thing that's gone on the ban list. There is a duty of care for the sports as well.
Well, I guess from where I sit, being a non-athlete, and knowing that I can go to the WADA website, I can put in a substance or a drug, and it will tell me immediately whether or not that it's prohibited or not. It just seems like, in the case of Maria Sharapova, her saying, well, I took this drug and it was called Meldronate, but Meldonium is what was banned. That seems like a cop-out to me, because I think it's common sense that every drug has a commercial name and a scientific name. I feel like people just should know that, but you're an athlete and you hear over and over and over again from so many athletes that you have to be so aware of what you put in your body, that's just not a good excuse, because from a non-athlete athlete's point of view, going and looking at the list and seeing what was newly banned. I know that the list as a whole is very, very long, but to go look at something that's newly banned, it's really rather short. So I feel like there are excuses flying around like, oh, I didn't know, I didn't see it, but I feel like it's really not that hard to find out.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's certainly not an invalid point of view. I guess what I would counter there is, and I'm not taking a view either way on these particular cases, except to say that 150 in the first few weeks is really a lot. That's really a lot of cases. If you're talking about, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 or even 30 is getting up to a lot. The argument that you make, I think, has a huge amount of credibility. When you're getting up to around 150, I think the question has to turn to, where did this go wrong?
Right.
Yep. It becomes a systemic issue then. Suddenly, it's not an individual issue.
Because when you look at it from an athlete's perspective, if something is well communicated, it's going onto the banned list. There's a very definitive test for it. They were monitoring Meldonium last year and picked up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of positives across dozens of sports. A very simple test for it. Why would you take it if you knew?
Right.
You're going to get picked up. It's not like it's some secret drug and there's no test for it or anything like that. This is really dead easy to detect. You'd stop it in a heartbeat if you knew. So the question is, why didn't these athletes know?
Well, and it's interesting that you say if you knew, and that reminds me of what just came out within the last day or so about these young hockey players in Russia. Do you think, or do you know if the parents, if the kids, did they know they were being given this drug?
Well, look, that's a really interesting case. There's been a little bit of reporting about it. There are some things that we don't know. For instance, we don't know if these hockey players actually tested positive. There's actually been no reports of them testing positive. The mail that I have, and it's just today, is that these hockey players haven't tested positive at all. That what's happened is that the management of the team has discovered that they were being given Meldonium as a team. And so they made the decision to pull themselves from international competition, because if they did turn up at a tournament somewhere internationally, they would get tested. And if they were tested, they would test positive. And if more than 2 of them tested positive, then the results of the entire team would be stripped from the whole international competition. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, and that's going to be a bigger story over the next couple of days and weeks.
But this is my question, because at this point, it's April 7th, and this happened a couple of days ago. We all know what Meldonium or Mildronate is. So my question is that you mentioned in the beginning state-sponsored doping in Russia. Could it be that some of these athletes were being given this drug unaware that they were being given it? And also perhaps those who knew it were told that this was undetectable? As in the case like with Balco, where they were told you're getting the clear and there's no test possible, that they can find it, that whatever they're doing is not going to work.
Yeah, look, I don't think that's the case. I think what you're finding here is that Meldonium is something, it's a medication that's been widely given to athletes in Eastern Europe for a decade. Preventative this and help you with that, almost like a vitamin in a way.
Right.
One athlete mentioned it like that. He said he was getting it. Olympic gold medalist Plushenko mentioned, Evgeny Plushenko mentioned, I was getting Meldonium with like vitamins.
Yeah. So it seems like all of these athletes were getting it like a vitamin, perfectly legitimately until the 31st of December, but some of them kept on going into the 1st of January. And in this particular hockey team, I think you find that it was probably the team management that was still giving these are minors, they're under 18, they're kids, giving them Meldonium, just like they had been the year before and the year before that and the year before that, but then perfectly legitimately, but now it's banned.
Well, it will certainly be interesting to find out if the kids knew they were taking it, if the parents knew they were taking it. It's going to be interesting.
I
And why?
think
But
in
why
the
were they
end,
giving the
though.
kids this?
Well, no,
Continue to give.
I think in the end the kids knew, because the thing is, if you characterize it as a vitamin, or if you characterize it as something that's perfectly normal that everyone is taking, there isn't a sense that it has to be a secret anymore. That's what I mean. I think that's what's really sort of flowing out of this conversation, is that this isn't it's not a secret drug that no one knew you could test for. Everyone now knows that they can test for it. It's just that the perception of the drug for the past 10 years has been one thing. It's like suddenly if somebody were to tell us that Tylenol is illegal, you know what I mean? Like, we've been taking it, it's not a secret. So
Yeah.
that seems to be what the direction that this is showing, is that the team knows that they've been taking the drug, and even though they're not, and also because we've now realized that people don't know how long it's in your system, so they're anticipating positive tests because they don't know how long it might have left their system, 6 weeks or 3 months. I
Well,
don't know.
in this case, I think with the hockey player and Maria, they mentioned they clearly were taking it in the new year. I mean, that can be, at least in my mind, it's clear that they took the drug in the new year.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to remember about the hockey players are that I've got a lot of empathy when kids are involved in these sort of things.
Yes.
You know, if someone's an adult, you know, they've got responsibility and all that sort of thing. But if you're a kid, if you're 16, 17, playing in an under 18 side, then you're underage. You're a minor. You've got guardians around you who are there to look out for you and protect you. I take a really, really hard line when it comes to support staff, particularly looking after kids who do the wrong thing by those kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone's let them down.
Yeah. We've seen it in other countries around the world, but those support teams, particularly with minors and children, have a critical role to play, and they need to accept responsibility.
Well, is the state-sponsored doping in Russia similar to the East German situation in the 1970s, 80s?
Yeah, look, it's not quite the same. I mean, in East Germany, it was a state-developed, state-sponsored program. I think what you're seeing in Russia is more individual federations who are, I don't know, they're being a bit sneaky, aren't they? I think that's the way best to look at it. You know, where no one's really watching here, and yeah, these guys are taking a little bit of stuff, and here comes a positive test. We can bury it and get them going because we want to win a few medals. So it doesn't look like it's something that's, you know, it's coming down from the Kremlin. It looks like it's individuals within particular Russian federations and
The entrepreneur.
Entrepreneurial fraud, sort of thing.
You know, one thing we wanted to talk to you a little bit about this too, Richard, because because of your history, sort of in terms of kind of rule behavior. Do you think that there's really a link between sort of doping issues and what is the word we're looking for, Janina? And
The gambling syndicates
and the
and just all
syndicates
the
and all of
corruption.
that. Like, are those linked at all? Do you think?
Yes.
Elaborate, please.
Do tell us.
Yeah. How do you think that? How do you think those all go together? How?
Let me tell you just take 15 seconds to tell you a story.
Go ahead. We love story time.
When I started working here at the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority, we sat down to try and work out who should we target as athletes who may be involved in doping. You know, and the experts got up and said, you know, look for them with injuries and look for them coming back to competition, and they're getting older and want to stay in the game, and all those sorts of things came up, and they're kind of the standard things you look for. And then there was a new staff member sitting down the back, very quietly put their hand up, and we said, yes, well, you know, what's your input? And this lady said, look for people who break rules.
In general.
In general, look for people who break rules.
Yep.
And we thought about it, and we thought, that's it. Bingo, that's it. We're looking for people who are prepared to bend or break rules. And if you're prepared to bend or break a rule in terms of drugs in sport, then you're prepared to bend or break a rule in terms of gambling in sport, or match fixing in sport, or racial vilification in sport, or homophobia in sport. It becomes a big ecosystem of people who have a tendency to overstep the boundary mark wherever that boundary mark would be. And I think that's something to bear in mind here, the linkage between people involved in match fixing and other things, and people involved in the use of performance enhancing drug. These are rule breakers, and if you break one rule, you may break others.
So what should worry a tennis fan then? Because in terms of tennis this year, we've had a couple on that list. Right? We've had some hints of match fixing, and then we've had this doping allegation, and so that's a really troubling scenario if you think about it for tennis. That's always sort of sold itself in a particularly sort of clean sport.
Plus, there is dependent results for all those singles players who were tested at Melbourne. It came out that everyone was tested, so presumably Maria shouldn't be the only one statistically who tested positive for anything.
Yeah, look, I mean, I love tennis. I've lived tennis. I've worked in the locker rooms with tennis, and it's a fantastic sport with fantastic players. It's a great global sport. It's got huge crowds, huge TV, and things like that. But tennis is a sport at risk. It's a sport at higher risk than many other sports. It's a sport at risk of players using performance-enhancing drugs, because performance-enhancing drugs will greatly help a tennis player. I mean, you think about it too. Tennis players have very, very similar capabilities. Ranked between 25 and 250 in the world. Their volley and their forehand and their backhand and all that sort of thing, tend to be pretty similar. And the differences between them tend to be how fit they are and how fast they are, and how hard they can train and how many tournaments they can play to win more ranking points and more prize money. And all these things take a toll on the body. And that's where performance-enhancing drugs come in. It will make you fitter. It will make you faster. It will make you stronger. It will let you come back more quickly from injuries. They will let you play more tournaments every year. It will let you extend your career for many more years to earn more money. So tennis is the perfect sport for an athlete who is seeking to overcome something with performance-enhancing drugs. And equally, tennis is hugely at risk with match fixing. It's an individual sport. There's vast money being bet on all levels of tennis, right down to futures. And one player can fix a match without telling anybody else, without telling their opponent. They miss a backhand, they hit a double fault on a break point, and they've lost 6-3, 6-4, and the fix is in and no one knows.
Can I ask a question? I mean, because everything you're saying is clearly obvious to me, and I think my co-host, it's clearly obvious to us. But apparently, when that message goes out into the wider public, it seems as if you're speaking, I don't even know, like Martian, because people don't seem to see that correlation clearly. Was this a popular, did you ever say this in the meetings that you've had? Because I'm surprised at tennis, when people speak of match fixing and doping, that the backlash and the response of like, oh no, this is not happening tennis, or never tennis, is so strong and loud. As opposed to, yeah, maybe we need to look at some people closer and some of the situation a lot closer, because we have all the elements needed to foot this sport.
Yeah, look, I mean, those involved in tennis, in the administration side, and I know these people. Many of them are the same people I work with when I was at the ATP. Many of them are still working in tennis from the days that I was an umpire back in the 80s. These are really good people who understand these issues and know them very, very well, and internally take them seriously. What you tend to see publicly, though, is a bit of PR spin, don't you? You don't want to publicly say something that casts doubt on the sport. And tennis did something in January after the stories with BuzzFeed and the BBC that just made me cringe. I think it was the head of the RTF put out a press release saying, vouching for the integrity of tennis, and in it, you go back and have a look. He he actually said there are 15,000 tennis players on the circuit, and they're all good people.
Yeah.
And I nearly started laughing.
Well, I did laugh.
We laugh. I did the math, and you had for these 15,000 people, you have 3 people on the tennis integrity unit looking into all these 15,000 people. I don't know how that's happening, but maybe these 15,000 are good people, but those 3 men certainly can't be good men.
Well,
I do a good job.
I remember just in an internal meeting when I was at the ATP, this kind of terminology about, tennis players are all good people coming up in a meeting, and I said, well, you don't know most of them.
Right.
Exactly.
Would you let
Or
them
also that good people can do bad things. You know, that it's...
I actually remember saying in the meeting, would you lend all of those 15,000 people $1,000 and expect to get it back? Would you trust them all to take your daughter out on a date?
Right.
The answer is no, because you don't know them. So how do you know what they will do? And this, for me, this is where it comes back in sport to the fans need to trust the sport. They need to trust the players and enjoy the competition. But the fans also need to demand of the sport verification. And that's the issue, that the focus should be on the sport. Have you got the verification that you need to catch those involved in match fixing? Have you got the verification that you need to catch those involved in doping? And with match fixing, 3 people is just not enough with the amount of tennis going on to be able to monitor it to even close to the level that you need.
Right.
Richard, what do you think? Why do you think that? What do you think is the sort of the end game for the group at BuzzFeed? Because it seems like every couple of weeks they drop something new. So what is this dance that we are noticing as fans of the sport or as people who are just looking closely? What's your sense?
I mean, I've had contact with the journalists at BuzzFeed and the journalists at the BBC who have done these stories. And basically where they're coming from is it's from a legitimate perspective. There are a lot of matches taking place in tennis every year which have suspicious betting patterns, where the odds have shifted and strange bets are being placed and things like that. And that was the basis of the story. But kind of what they missed is suspicious betting patterns can be explained by a number of things. And most of those things are perfectly legitimate. The guy had an injury in the locker room and someone saw him and told someone gambling, or there's a lot of legitimate reasons for shifts in betting patterns. But a subset of those matches with unusual betting patterns are matches of real concern that require real investigation to work out exactly what's happening. So the problem isn't nearly as big as what the BBC or BuzzFeed are pointing out, but the problem is not small either. And the Tennis Integrity Unit needs to beef up a lot to try and deal with this issue.
I feel like BuzzFeed and the BBC are doing this dance where they say, fix it or we're going to tell more. Do you see that? It just seems like every once in a while they're just dropping a little bit more, another new name or something.
Yeah, look, I mean, what the BBC and BuzzFeed have, and a lot of this has been in the reporting that they've done, they've been able to see text messages and Skype messages between certain players and gamblers, and BBC and BuzzFeed are asking the very legitimate question that they've seen this information. Why aren't these particular players being prosecuted?
Right.
And the Tennis Integrity Unit will come back and say, well, we're looking into this, but we're not sure we've got enough evidence. So what you've actually got here is both sides are right, and there's a lack of transparency and communication to give the assurance to the media and the assurance to the fans that the system in place behind the scenes is really working. I know the TIU people are working flat out. I know that these are good people. I know that they won't prosecute players if it's not solid, and if they have solid evidence, they will take it forward. But they need to explain more what they're doing so people have confidence in exactly what's worked through.
Right, because it looks really bad when the head of the Tennis Integrity Unit says, well, you know what? I didn't even look at the list of names. I just assumed that the person that sat before me did their job.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's been a few sort of things like that which sort of make you scratch your head just a little bit. But the good thing is that in response to the BBC and BuzzFeed story, Tennis has set up an inquiry. And it is an independent inquiry.
Independent-ish, we like to call it here. It's independent-ish. We know exactly what's gonna be the response. There's nothing wrong with Tennis. We're good.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty good inquiry. I think that the people who are doing it, they've been given the time, they've been given the latitude, and they've been given the budget to be able
definitely the budget.
And talk to people and come up with some solid recommendations. And fingers crossed, I hope I get a chance to talk to this independent review as well. I'd love to give them my input.
Why are you hopeful about it, Richard? Because I mean, I find quite a bit of people fairly cynical who does this work. So why are you hopeful about this? About
it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, the reason that I'm hopeful is tennis is a sport with lots of different stakeholders. You know, you got the ITF and the WTA and the ATP and the Grand Slams, and they kind of don't work together as much as they should. You get conflicting agendas. And sometimes what you need is a bit of a bomb placed under the sport to get it moving. And what the BBC and BuzzFeed and even ABC television here in Australia did in January and February is they put a bomb under the sport on this issue. So an inquiry has been established. It looks pretty good to me in terms of how they're doing it and what they're doing. It's going to come back with some recommendations, and maybe this is just what the sport needs to cut through some of the political barriers and actually get some stuff done. So I'm pretty confident we might get some good outcomes out of it.
And go ahead.
We keep hearing that. I mean, from where I sit, it seems like BuzzFeed again is withholding information from the public. They know something, but they don't want to tell it, and they drop terms like "there's a global superstar involved" or things like that. Do you feel like tennis between the institution itself and the media is all-encompassing, and they try to protect each other? Because in most sports, players and the media do not have this feeling of trust. Everybody's kind of weary of each other, but in tennis, everyone's so friendly.
Yeah, look, it's one of those challenges, I think, in being a sports journalist, and journalists covering sport need to be a little bit careful. It's very, very important, you know, to convey the atmosphere to fans and the players and the personalities and all that sort of thing. But by the same token, journalists who are covering sport need to be journalists.
Right.
And they need to dig for the story, and they need to look for the skeletons in the closet, whether it's the sport itself or individual players. And for a sports journalist, this can be really, really, really hard, because when they push into a certain area, it's very, very common that they get frozen out. They get frozen out in media conferences and interviews, and we've seen this in cycling in the past. I would hate to see this sort of thing happening in tennis.
I agree, but it seems like, I don't know, it just seems a little bit too close-knit for me to trust anything that the people who cover tennis week in and week out. It's almost like you can't trust what they're saying because I feel like they're protecting people.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know most of the you know, the week-to-week journalists covering tennis. These are great people, you know. They cover it well. They do a great job and all that sort of thing. I personally understand the limits of what they need to do, and that's why, you know, when a BBC or a BuzzFeed or a Panorama or you know, an ABC Four Corners here in Australia, you know, when some of those journalists get into sporting issues, whether it's match fixing in tennis or concussion in the NFL or whatever, they can do stuff that the day-to-day sports journalists really can't. And to be frank, that's what those investigative news journalists are there to do. So it's great when they stick their nose into sports like tennis because we get real expert journalists looking for stories without fear or favor. It's great for the sport, I think.
Richard, to go back a little bit to the drug issue, what does it mean for sports and anti-doping that the folks where we've had controversy, say like a Lance Armstrong or something like that, they've never tested positive? What does that mean? How can we take this initiative seriously? Because once it all comes out, you realize it was just sort of like a mushroom effect of so many people participating in sort of the Lance Armstrong machine.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's a really good comment. And I guess what I would say there is when people think about anti-doping, they think about drug testing. When they think about drug testing, they think about anti-doping. And drug testing is just part of anti-doping. It used to be all of anti-doping, but now it's only part of anti-doping, and it's increasingly becoming a smaller and smaller part of anti-doping. And the reason for that is that there are so many drugs that athletes can use that even the very best testing in the world just can't detect it. It can't detect it at all. And no amount of testing will uncover a doctor who's giving blood doping.
Dr. Zhivago, we don't know who the...
Well, or this doctor,
Dr.
or
Bonar.
the doctor that...
Yeah.
Yeah, what about that doctor in the UK that says he's sort of giving...
He supposedly has a list of 150-something athletes who he's been treating. I mean, does WADA have the authority, or does someone have the authority to say, tell us who your patients are?
Well, you'll all be reassured to know that the UK government have announced an inquiry.
Yes.
Oh!
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
They would be in Parliament, so I'll be watching that press conference live as well.
Yeah, so actually we have 3 inquiries at the moment. We've got the inquiry into tennis with the match fixing. We've got the inquiry into UK anti-doping and the whole thing with this Harley Street physician. And of course we have the ongoing inquiry into anti-doping in Russia. And I think on the side there's also inquiry into anti-doping efforts in Kenya as well. So we've got multilateral, multinational inquiries going on everywhere.
But meanwhile, no one's advocating for Kenya though. It's all about Maria and Russia
and the Russians.
Meanwhile,
what's going
Kenya,
on there? What's that? What happened there?
Russia has multiple opportunities to get gold medal, but Kenya only got a few in those long distance. And if Kenya goes, they're going with nothing. So I think people should be crying for Kenya most so.
Oh yeah, so Richard, you did a really good job of sort of giving us the context of what happened with Russia and its problems. What's the problem with Kenya? Is it the same thing that positive tests were coming back and their athletes were they were sort of not told about it, or they were told about it and people wanted money?
No, look, Kenya is a little bit different, and Kenya is different because anti-doping requires a resource. It requires people on the ground.
Right.
It requires individuals who can go and get a sample from athletes. The samples need to be no notice. If you give an athlete a phone call to say, can we make an appointment at 11 o'clock tomorrow to come and take your blood sample? Sadly, you're not going to catch them. So, and what was happening in Kenya, and we need to have a degree of sympathy for countries which are under-resourced, and Kenya, I think it would
definitely one of those places.
Is extremely under-resourced. It doesn't have a laboratory. The runners are training in remote locations in the mountains at altitude, so getting to them is difficult, and getting to them without notice is very difficult. So it means that the testing in Kenya was pretty much non-existent. You add to that the Kenyan pharmacy system is pretty porous. If you walk into a pharmacy in Kenya and want to buy some EPO, they'll give you a bonus box if you buy 5. It's
I guess we should have been going to Kenya and buying our drugs. I don't know. Yeah.
Maria, you got the wrong doctor, girl. You got the wrong doctor.
Dr. Zhivago was not right. Okay.
The final very critical element in Kenya is you tend to have a group of of athletes which are being looked after by managers and agents who take a cut of their winnings. The athletes themselves tend to be athletes of lower standard of education. They tend to be much more trusting of the entourages around them, and are therefore more susceptible to potentially being given things without so much checking that an athlete with more education may well do. So you add all of these things together, and it's pretty much an anti-doping disaster waiting to happen, and that's what you're seeing in Kenya at the moment.
Yeah, it would seem so, because if you have something like WADA that has this sort of doping code, and then they expect each individual country to execute it, but then there isn't some sort of resource cap.
Right. I was wondering about that.
To ensure that happens. It would always have to be a sort of a mixed bag. No, some countries will be really in compliance and others won't. Just for the things for the issues that you laid out right there, just plain resource issues.
Yeah, look again, you're spot on. WADA's been around for about a bit over a decade now, and for the first decade, WADA did all this fantastic work about drafting a set of rules. This thing called the WADA Code, that everyone would sign up for, and all these countries and sports would become WADA compliant. Well, all that hard work's been done now. Everyone's signed up to the bit of paper. But now the real work begins, getting 200 countries and 200 anti-doping agencies to actually implement that 12,000-word rule book consistently and effectively. And that's where we've got massive problems at the moment, because you've got the Kenya on one extreme where they're not doing anything, and you've got the Russia on the other hand where they're doing lots and lots, but it's all corrupt. And then you've got countries like the UK where they've got their own issues now, and Australia where you've got resources. You've got these widely, almost like the Grand Canyon.
Because WADA doesn't provide funding, right? WADA just provides the rules.
Yeah, WADA just provides the rules, and then it's up to each individual country to allocate sufficient resource for the job, and most don't.
Can we just back up a second? I want to ask you to explain something. You said, that anti-doping used to be, the majority of it was the testing. What is it now, if that's not what it is anymore?
Yeah, what anti-doping is all about today, and when I say all about it today, I'm really only talking about pretty much a handful of anti-doping agencies who have this capability. Anti-doping is about investigations, investigating allegations of doping, and trying to find out whether doping occurred or not. And testing is one of the tools to find out whether doping occurred. But working with a medical board to get prescriptions from doctors is another way of doing it. Working with law enforcement who have tapped phones and seized computers from doctors and traffickers is another way of doing it. So resourced anti-doping organizations have a range of different tools now to catch people involved in doping, and the most effective tools actually don't involve testing at all. They actually involve partnerships with police, partnerships with customs services, seizing things coming in through shipping ports and mail exchanges, partnerships with serious fraud squads like in the UK, partnerships with medical boards. Who are the doctors that were recently struck off for overprescribing human hormone?
Doesn't it also involve providing a safe place for people who are in the sport and are aware to speak up?
Yeah, look, it really does. And I remember when we first started going down this path at ASADA back in about 2006, we started investigating the sport of weightlifting, and we found that there was a lot of bad stuff going on. Weightlifters and coaches and performance-enhancing drugs. And we spoke to some weightlifters, and we said, you knew this was going on, why didn't you say something? And they said, we didn't know who to call.
Right.
They said, we didn't want to call the bosses at the Weightlifting Federation because we actually thought they were in on it.
Oh dear, yeah.
And were they?
Well, I won't go there.
A few.
Maybe a few. Maybe a few.
I need to check my liability insurance.
Exactly. They don't know about us. It's okay. It's secretly between us.
That's all right. But yeah, I mean, but that's a serious thing. I mean, I think that's a real challenge for, as we sort of talk about, we've been talking about tennis match fixing and gambling.
It's the same issue with our match fixing, yeah.
We worry about that for the individual player as well. That if there's really a safe space.
We just had Dominika Cibulkova come out and talk about Maria Sharapova. I mean, it's no secret that the WTA players have been given talking points when they are asked about what they feel, as far as what Maria is going through right now. And for whatever reason, Cibulkova says, you know what, I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to be the only one. But the truth is, there are a lot of people who are pissed off about this.
Yeah.
And that, I feel, is really unfair. I mean, here you have an organization telling the people who you want to be clean not to be upset with someone who has tested dirty. It doesn't really matter if she did it intentionally or not. The bottom line is she failed a drugs test, and she admitted it. So why is there this overwhelming support? Is it because she came out and said, hey, everybody, I did this and I'm sorry? Which, did she even really apologize? I don't know. But I mean, I can't wrap my mind around this. Why aren't people allowed to be angry?
Well, I think the public has seen so many athletes with positive drug tests that those that have a positive drug test tend to fall into, one of two categories. So you've got the most common category is deny. Deny. I didn't do anything. I didn't take anything. I never inhaled. Whatever it is, it's to deny.
My twin, it was a twin who failed a drug test.
I kissed a girl.
Someone spiked my toothpaste. I had sex too much.
Yeah, exactly.
And the public gets very, very jaded with these excuses. So when somebody comes forward, and Sharapova did it in her case, and we've seen it in other cases as well, when an athlete who does test positive comes forward and accepts responsibility and says, yes, I did do it, and yes, there were some extenuating circumstances, but I'm admitting to an anti-doping rule violation, it's kind of refreshing in a way, because we don't see that very often. And I think we all, as fans, we recognise that people do make mistakes, and we are prepared to forgive if people are, if our heroes and superstars are prepared to not deny, not make excuses, but acknowledge what they did.
Well, how do you feel about this? Okay, so someone fails a drugs test. They fail it once. That's fine. But the reality is we have multiple offenders. Why is it so hard to say, you know what, here's the rule. You fail once, you get a second chance. You fail again, you get a lifetime ban. I just feel like that would solve so many problems. Why isn't that, I mean, is that a topic of conversation? Is that a possibility?
No.
No? Why?
Because to answer your question, I mean, I just want to add something to the equation here, Janine. It's because, as we have seen, is that anytime testing positive, as I think Richard mentioned, it should be a straight up and down. You test positive, you're punished, get out of here, etc. But that rarely ever happens, because I think all doping positive tests go to the code of arbitration for sport, and then that turns into a whole circus. And then even within tennis, like, I do not think anyone who's been given an initial ban served that length of ban. They've all been reduced. So you have a whole bunch of extenuating circumstances that are always playing, and then people rarely ever want to.
Wouldn't it clean up every sport if you said one time you serve a ban, second time you're out? Why can't we do that? Why is that not feasible?
You can say it, but
yeah. At the moment, the way the rules work is if you have we call it an anti-doping rule violation, not just a positive test, but you violated anti-doping rules. The first time that you do it, you serve up to a maximum of a 4-year ban. It depends on the substance and your degree of fault, and all sorts of factors come into it. But it can be up to a 4-year ban, and there are many athletes at the moment getting 4-year bans. If you commit a second anti-doping rule violation, it goes up to a life ban, type of thing. So that kind of principle is in place at the moment. But the main reason why athletes are involved in doping, and you probably see more doping today in sport than you did going back a decade ago, to be frank. The reason that athletes are involved in doping in sport today is because it's so easy to do it, and because the chances of being caught are still very low.
Yeah.
If the anti-doping authorities can start getting their act together on some pretty simple stuff to make it much more likely that athletes in particular sports who are doping will get caught, you're going to see a real impact, a real reduction in the amount of doping that's going on in sport. That's the issue today. It's not the length of the ban.
What are those simple?
You get caught.
What are those simple situations you think that could be done to improve?
Testing in Kenya, there's one.
Well, yeah, because let's think about it.
Testing in Jamaica, testing in Ethiopia, testing in Kenya, not having a corrupt lab in Russia. I'll give you one other example. Do you know that there are about 32 WADA laboratories around the world doing testing? That they don't all have the same standards. That there are some labs that are better
I can see that.
at detecting than others. When I was working with ASADA and with tennis, there was only literally maybe 4 or 5 labs out of the whole lab network of 32 that I would even touch, that I'd send a sample to.
Wow.
Because right?
So
you know which ones are good and which ones are bad. It's like most things,
Yeah, it's like most things. Another thing which is really interesting is, do you know that most samples that are collected from athletes are not tested for every banned substance?
Yes, that I do know.
Why?
No,
why
I don't know that.
Why take a substance and only test them?
So what are they testing for? No, I had no idea about that. Explain that. Like, what do you mean?
The likeliest substances that you would get, depending
What's
on
like
the
most
sport.
popular now?
Yes.
Yeah. So what you have is when you take a urine sample, it goes to the lab. It gets what's called a full screen. So it's tested for a suite of banned substances. But there are some things that it's not tested for. So things like EPO are not tested for automatically. Things like advanced steroid testing are not tested for automatically. Things like human growth hormone are not tested for automatically. Blood doping is not tested for automatically. These things require an additional test, a little bit more.
Is it a money issue?
Well, it is. An EPO test costs a lot more than a regular full-screen urine test. But my point is, when you're taking a sample from an athlete to test for a banned substance, you don't know what they're taking. So how do you decide what not to test for?
Right.
Right. It seems silly.
So if you can imagine for a minute, let's say that every single sample collected from every single athlete was tested every single time for every single substance that's banned, that would really help.
Yeah.
But also be really expensive.
Expensive, right.
But you know what? I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea what testing costs. But sports money, the revenue it's just unreal. All across the board. The money they bring in is ridiculous. I would imagine if they just took maybe like 2% off the top and added that to anti-doping, that they could probably test for all of that stuff. Why don't?
But this comes
a commitment to it.
But hold on, Janita. But let us think about the U.S. and baseball.
I think they don't want to find people.
Right.
Richard, do you think that? The truth is, you don't want to find out that the superstar of your sport is a drug cheat.
Yeah, look, that's not been my experience.
No?
Yeah,
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, my experience is a little bit different. My experience is that many of these sports go into this anti-doping process thinking that our 15,000 players are all good, right?
They're good people.
They're all good people, so we'll do the things that are recommended, but we don't need to do much more than that. And the limit is
the bare minimum.
Yeah, the limit is kind of politically self-imposed.
Yeah.
And, it's not so much a money issue. When you look at global anti-doping, 200 countries, 200 sports, do you know that collectively, across all of anti-doping, the amount of money spent every year is $500 million.
Wow.
$500 million is being spent collectively on anti-doping. And I tell you what, we need to get our money back because
it's not working.
$500 million is not really being well spent. And if we're conducting 100 tests at the moment for partial screens, and to do full screens means we can only do 80 tests. I'd rather do 80 tests.
Yeah. So we've recently learned that at the Australia Open last year, or this past Australia Open, they tested everybody. Is that unprecedented? Are they promoting that because they say they want us to know we're testing everyone, or is that new in your experience?
I think was it? Let's just clarify. Is it that they took samples from everyone, or that might be the issue, as opposed to they really test everyone and do a full panel?
Yeah, look, the tennis testing program's improved a great deal. Go back a couple of years, I for one was pretty critical of it. It was doing things which I thought were not best practice. It had softened up in different areas from the program that I was involved in when I was running it for men's pro tennis.
Do you want to tell us what those were? Why it was soft?
Yeah, some of the things that I noticed was there was not enough testing being done at the lower levels, at the challenges and particularly at the futures level. That's been improved now. There's actually testing going on at the lower levels. There was the testing was pretty predictable. If you played a big tournament and you lost your match, you would be picked for testing. Well, what about testing someone who won their match?
Yeah.
Which would seem to be the point.
Well, and honestly, we see that on the higher levels because Federer just talked about it. He said, he just had this surgery, and doping control was testing him all the time since he's been out and in Switzerland recovering from this surgery, but he has never been tested in Dubai. That's insane. That's unacceptable.
Is that why people move there? No, I'm just kidding. Aside from the weather. No.
How do you explain that? That's unacceptable.
Yeah, look, that's a gap. Clearly, that's
that's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, but I think it would be fair to say, and I'm someone who's been very critical of the tennis program, anti-doping program. It's improved a great deal. They've really put some more money into it and some more effort into it. It's much better. But even a really, really good anti-doping program is not going to catch the serious doper. I could put together a doping program for an athlete today.
Yes, and we wanted to ask you if you could create the what you thought should be the standard, what would that look like? If you could revamp the system, what would it look like?
Well, if I was to get my wish list,
yeah,
to improve global anti-doping, there's a few things that I would do which are not that difficult to do, but they're probably politically difficult to do. The first thing that I would do is that every single sample collected would be tested for everything. I think that's just so fundamental that you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what to leave off the test. So make every single sample tested for absolutely everything that you possibly can test for. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I would do is there's around 32 or 36 laboratories around the world analyzing samples. I'd get rid of 2/3 of them. And I would have a dozen mega laboratories with the absolute cutting-edge staff and equipment that can do the most sophisticated analysis of every sample to any level. And because there's only 12 of them, they've got the scale with enough samples coming through that they can keep their prices low, so you can do more testing. Mm-hmm. That's another big problem. You've got all these small labs that don't get enough samples to really get the volume. They're very expensive, and their standards are hopeless. So, and you think about it, it's difficult enough to know which athlete to test. But imagine finally getting the sample from the athlete and sending it to a lab that misses the positive because they're not very good.
Right.
So if you could just fix those two things, test every sample for everything, and have a nucleus of laboratories with absolute cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, best practice analysis, that would make a huge difference.
I like it. I like it a lot.
I like that. But Richard, I have been dying to know. Do you think that we'll ever find out about those doping bags in Spain? Will we ever get those bags? Do you know? I know that. I think WADA said they were trying to get it. There was supposed to be the judge ruled in Spain that they were supposed to be destroyed. This is just one of those curious questions I always wanted to ask someone who might know.
Yeah, look, personally, I think the chances of getting that material is very slim.
Yeah.
And it's not to criticize the Spanish laws, because I think you would find that if a similar situation happened in the UK, or a similar situation happened in Australia or Canada, or I would imagine even in the US, that medical biological material is personal private medical data, and it's between the patient and the doctor and the medical authorities, and unless there's particular laws and approvals that have been put in place, it can't be shared with other authorities,
Which is probably what's going to happen when someone demands lists of names from this Dr. Boner.
Yeah, wouldn't that be in some sense the same issue there?
Yeah, and most countries around the world, medical information like this, it can be shared if there's a matter of criminality at place.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about here is whether someone hits a tennis ball for a year or two.
Yeah.
So, quite often the laws don't extend to whether we stop someone from hitting the tennis ball. If you broke the law, that would be different.
Yeah.
But it doesn't extend to that. So this is not just a challenge legally in Spain, but I reckon it'd be a challenge in most countries around the world if the same situation happened.
And then I have another quick aside. The biological passport, everyone talks about it as sort of the best thing that could ever happen in anti-doping. What's your sense about that?
Look, it's pretty good. It's certainly an improvement. But you guys may not have seen it, but there was a BBC Panorama program late last year called Catch Me If You Can. Mm-hmm. And in this program, there was a journalist from Scotland who actually decided to cheat on camera. He was an amateur level cyclist. And
I saw that. I actually saw that. Yes, I saw that.
So what he decided to do was he bought some EPO and he got some advice about how to microdose the EPO to a level that would be not detectable through testing and would fall within the parameters of the biological passport. And so he took this stuff and followed the dark side of sport tips on how to use it. He had someone with the biological passport software monitor him during the whole period, and he passed.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes back to the tweet that you have pinned on your Twitter profile that says, "Why do athletes dope? Because doping works, and because the anti-doping industry is ineffective at catching anyone in motive equals or plus opportunity." I mean, that really is what it all comes down to at the end of the day. The dopers are always a step ahead of the testers, always.
Well, that makes sense because dopers don't have any rules, right?
I know, they're rule breakers by nature.
Right.
They don't follow any code. Superman can't kill you, but Lex Luthor certainly can because he doesn't follow any rules.
And that tweet that I've got pinned on my profile, and my profile is ringsau for those who enjoy this sort of morbid discussion on drugs in sport. Come and join.
It's great. It is great. You put out some really interesting stuff there. I love it.
We chat a lot, and I used to work in marketing, so I'll give it a plug.
There you go. I will tell you that he's very good at responding to people, so go ahead and tweet him.
Yeah. So look, the reason I put that tweet there is that, firstly, doping does work, and secondly, if everyone involved in sport or anyone involved in sport has a motive, and the motive is improving your performance, and it's all relative. Your motive for improving your performance may be to win an Olympic gold medal. Your motive to improve your performance may be to make the Olympic team. Your motive to improve your performance may be to make the varsity squad of your local high school football team. Everybody has in sport what is your own personal gold medal, and that's your motive, and the opportunity to use performance-enhancing drugs is everywhere.
I agree.
Isn't that morbid? Sorry about that.
I mean, I totally agree because, I mean, when I look at an athlete, I'm just like, you have dedicated your whole life to the physicality, and you need your body to respond. I think ages ago, Venus Williams mentioned something when she found out that she had Sjogren's syndrome. She said, it was crazy to tell me as an athlete that my body couldn't respond the way in which I wanted to. I kept thinking when she was showing the symptoms, she said, I just thought I had to train harder, etc. And in the situations, and that's what I imagine an athletes in the whole, like, oh, I need my body to go 50 miles an hour. I need to do this, and I can break the barriers of this because someone is telling me here is something that works. And for now, the short-term glory is better because there is a financial payoff in a lot of these situations. Even if it's not money, just like the glory, right? That, like, I am the captain of the team, everyone loves me, I get the girls, I get the boys. So it does work out in that manner in me. I'm surprised that people don't think that doping happens every day, everywhere.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I mean, Dick Pound, I don't know if you've ever worked with him, he mentioned something in a documentary I saw once where he says, he's rather suspicious of nearly everything he sees in sports these days. Do you take such a point of view?
Yeah, look, there are some sports I struggle to watch.
Would you like to tell us what? Which ones?
Well,
we like to keep it real here.
Bodybuilding?
Yeah.
Bodybuilding? I mean, let's go where it is, track and field.
Yeah. Well, and you've had many track and field athletes who've been caught doping. They say, I have to dope or I can't keep up because everyone's doping. I mean, they say that outright.
Do you think the ultimate irony is that maybe cycling is the cleanest of them all now?
Yeah, look, I mean, different sports have different degrees of risk. There's no doubt about it. These drugs can help any athlete in any sport, but they certainly do help some athletes in some sports more than others.
Yeah.
Cycling is a sport where it's all power and endurance, and these drugs will give you an extra 10%.
Yeah.
So it's going to make a big difference. But cyclists are still getting caught, and cyclists will continue to get caught. And it's not just at the elite level. What you're increasingly seeing now
is in the amateur level.
It's what we almost call them the pro amateurs, aren't they're in their 40s and their 50s, and they're in age group racing events across different countries, and they think nothing of spending a couple of $1,000s on their bike and getting a prescription of EPO to help them.
Because they could Instagram it and put it on social media and then get some. They can be closest they can get to fame. I think this is part of what it is too, because oh my God, he has like 100 followers, etc., a number of followers, and he does this. I think that's part of it because now we can all be that instant celebrity through social media. We can create our own hype.
You know what's funny is that I don't know whether you've heard of this. There's an app and a website called Strava, and Strava is a cycling monitoring app. You use it to map your rides, and it keeps stats on your performance and all that sort of thing. Well, some of these pro amateur cyclists who've been caught have their profiles on Strava, and you can go in and you can actually have a look and see where these drugs are working for them up the hills.
Wow. That's amazing.
Which is really amazing. But again, it goes back to having the opportunity to dope. These are individuals who can buy this stuff. It's not expensive. Anyone can buy it. But importantly, they have the motive to dope, and their motive is, they want to win the over 45s age group at their local weekend cycling meet.
I guess that's true.
We may laugh at that,
but it's true.
It's the reality.
Yeah. I mean, I play soccer on the weekend. I'm 50. I play in the over 45s, and we're old and fat, and we run around and we try and relive our glory days. And if you think about it, everyone there wants to be a little bit fitter, and everyone there has gone out to buy an expensive pair of boots because we think that it will hurt, but that will help. And what would be the disincentive for someone, even in that sort of group, to go and take something that would, strip a little bit of weight off or make you a little bit fitter, a little bit stronger? It would make you, in theory, enjoy the game more, and you're never going to get tested.
Exactly.
And also that woman in the, that sucker mom, she's looking at you. She's looking at you. It's like, yeah, who's the one scoring all the goals? Who's the champion? But before we go, Richard, I am intrigued to ask us a couple questions on your umpire days. So these are just like quick questions. What is the best match you have officiated?
The best match that I ever did, the most exciting match I ever did, was actually a fourth round at the French Open at Roland Garros between the then number one player in the world, Ivan Lendl, playing a 16-year-old kid from America called Michael Chang.
Ooh.
Hey, we might know who that is.
And Lendl won the first two sets pretty handily, and then Chang came back and won the next two sets, and we had a shootout in the fifth set in front of 20,000 people at Roland Garros, number one in the world versus a little tiny 16-year-old. And Michael Chang started cramping in the fifth set, and I gave him a warning and a point penalty for cramping.
I was wondering.
And then it got to a point late in the fifth set where Chang was receiving, and he had a match point, a break point match point on Lendl's serve, and Lendl hit a first serve fault, and then Michael Chang, who could barely walk by this stage, he went from the baseline and walked up and stood to receive the second serve on the service line. You got to go back. You go back and look at this. It's all on YouTube. So he saw
that's you.
The crowd went crazy. It was exciting end of the match. Lendl looked up at me. He hit a fault, and he said, "I want a first serve." Because making noise, and I said, "No, go back and hit your second serve." And he went back and he hit his second serve. It was double fault.
Oi!
It was a double fault, and Ivan wouldn't talk to me for a year.
Listen, I like that dedication. That's perfect.
I love it.
Begrudge. And I guess I'm gonna ask a question. Have you seen who are some of your favorite players to watch when you were at that time when you were officiating? You're just like, oh my God, I wish I were in the stands. I really gotta watch the line.
The player that I really enjoyed watching during that period, there were two. The first one was Stefan Edberg. This guy was fantastic to watch. The classic serve, classic volley, single-handed, beautiful backhand. Absolute brilliant to watch. So he was one of my favorites to watch, and he was a pleasure to umpire because he never said anything.
No back talk.
No, you could miss a ball by a foot, and he wouldn't even give you a second glance. So he was good. And the other one, and you may remember this player from France, incredibly athletic, talented showman on court, was Yannick Noah.
Yes.
From France, who had all the game and the gifts, and his son now is you may be aware, an NBA superstar as well.
Johan, I think. No, Joachim, I think his name is something with J. I think it is.
People love to hate him.
Just like his father, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're the two.
Last question is: was the time that you saw that you made a mistake and you just like, oops, I hope no one. Like when you make a mistake, do you like? Actually, no. I take that question back. What I want to know is that, as a former umpire, do you think there is place for a third umpire, like in cricket, like someone who could be like, oh, you made a mistake, like a sort of a off code who can review video review and be like, okay, that was not a lead or something of that sort.
Well, I'm going to answer your first question first, because what you're asking me is, did I ever make a mistake? And I umpired 2,000 matches, and I would think that I made probably thousands of mistakes.
Listen,
Rafa, you have a point. Rafa, you have a point.
Yeah, and you know the reason for that is when you're up there umpiring, it's a little bit different these days because you've got Hawkeye, and it's just really like playing an Xbox these days for an umpire. Back in the good old days when you had to call every line, you've got these players are hitting the ball at 150 miles an hour, and they're hitting it within a millimeter of lines, which from the umpire's chair, are 20 or 30 meters away from you, and if any person on the planet is able to see a 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter space at 30 meters distance on something moving at 150 miles per hour, they should get up in the umpire's chair.
Right?
So what you do in the umpire's chair is you use your experience and you try and be consistent. You try and make consistent calls, and it's when you're inconsistent that you get into trouble.
Leonie, he's talking to you, okay? He's talking to you. Have a little dig, Leonie. Just so you know, okay? You're a little inconsistent, okay? But that is you too, okay? Just so you know.
But the good thing about Muhammad Leonie is he smiles all the time.
He's so fun. He's so incredibly fun.
You've got Muhammad Leonie and mixed in with Kader Nooney, you'd get a smiling guy with a really sexy deep voice.
There you go. No
Serena
doubt.
says, don't talk to me unless you're going to give me a point penalty, Kader. I don't want to hear anything from you. You don't want to hear that sexy voice, okay?
Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my God.
So much.
You get another round of applause.
And so, when this goes up, we'll definitely share it with you.
Great.
And
So
then you can.
are we wrapped now, have we?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's been an absolute pleasure. We would, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, will you come back after the Sharapova verdict comes down so we can dissect it? I'd love to hear you talk about that.
I'm happy to. I mean, this is a really relaxed format, so I'm more. If I'm fitting in with what you're trying
and
to
next
achieve.
time, unfortunately, you're at work, but next time around, you can drink. We drink all the time.
But not today. We try to be very serious for you.
Exactly.
No.
All right, guys. I've got to get back to work here, so you take it easy.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Good night, fans. Good day, fans, and thank you very much for my lovely co-host again, Janina. And Andreen, Janina, you get another round of applause. You were so good. I'm going to send you the check for the profit that we made this week.
You lying bastard.
Which is no money.
A nice blank check.
So, good night, ladies. And fans, don't forget to comment below and tweet us and let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Good night, good day, and don't forget, don't listen to us on the treadmill. You might hurt yourself. Bye.
Ciao.